All right, today we're back to work on the C6 competition drift car build, and today we're going to be starting with those big question marks left on the build, those things that keep me up at night, the what ifs, the things that I'm wondering how we're going to do them, if we're going to be able to do them, how it's going to all pan out. That's the stuff I really want to tackle, because if we can get all that stuff checked off the list, the rest should be pretty easy. So that's where we're going to start today. We're going to start with the easiest one of them all, and that is adding a slip joint into the exhaust itself. We're also going to be adding a double slip joint for some flex in our hot side here. That's the one I'm most concerned about, probably. I also want to start working on the cold side into the intercooler, because there's a lot of different ways we can go about doing that, and I'm really not sure how it's all going to pan out, and we won't really know until we start cutting and fitting some pieces. So that being said, that's where we're going to start. Let's yank this exhaust out, try to fit this slip joint in there, get that one out of my mind, move on to the next thing. It's always not fun hacking up something you've already built. Now we test it. So with everything tacked on as even and as straight as humanly possible, we test fitted this thing back in to make sure it all fits, because where this is, if there's any bit of angle, it's going to make a drastic difference on the long end, because you have such a long piece that 2-3 degrees is affecting. So it's really important to test fit this. We did. It all fit good still. Everything was good to go. So it's time to weld it out. Now, we're being pretty cautious welding this out. We're not just going around in one shot. We've tacked it a bunch of times, and we're welding different spots, different ends, weld from this side and then flip it to the other side and weld that side and then kind of connect the dots. And the reason for that is to keep this from warping. If these warp and get all wonky and ovalized or something, they're not going to fit back together. And the whole point is that they slip together. And the main reason we're adding this is to give the exhaust some room to expand and contract and flex a little bit. Kind of like a flex joint, but flex joints tend to fail, so slip joints are usually the way to go. So with that welded on, we need to add our little spring clamps. So we've got to weld on these little hooks that the springs are going to attach to, and that just gives you the ability to hold these together. Now, it is important when we place these hooks that we place them in the right distance apart. We want the spring to be tugging on them a little bit, but we don't want it to have to be fully stretched out. We don't want it to be loose on there, because then that defeats the purpose. So it's always kind of tricky getting that right. I always struggle with deciding exactly where I want to put them and how much tension I want on them. But we got it done. We got those welded on, and it's time to throw this thing back in and see if it still fits. All right, slip joint officially installed. That's done. So moving on. Los Juanito. Get them bolts out of there. We ordered more of these bolts and they were the wrong ones. Pretty disappointing. So Josue is working on mounting the power steering pump. So we have this Mini Cooper electric power steering pump. I've tried the Volvo ones in 3 cars. It worked pretty good in the RX-7, terrible in the Miata, and absolutely terrible in the Safiro. From what I can tell, this seems like the best option. We can mount it in any orientation because it's external reservoir, so we don't have to deal with mounting it a specific way because the reservoir is attached like the Volvo pumps. Hopefully it's good, man. Power steering is probably the single biggest complexity of a drift car, especially a competitive drift car. Fingers crossed this pump works well. So anyway, that's what Josue is going to work on. These things are always really awkward to mount just because the factory mounts are always very awkwardly shaped. So I'm going to let Josue put his head to it, come up with something. Let's see what you can do, Josue. Let's see. The test is now. I'm not even going to look at it. No, I'm just kidding. I'll look at it.
No pressure.
But anyway, while he's working on that, I'm gonna go ahead and toss the front end back on because I have this 3.5-inch aluminum donut. So these are kind of cool. They're basically 2 halves. We have to weld the inside ourselves, but this gets us the tightest possible bend radius we can get out of a given material size. So this is for out of the turbo and into the intercooler. And I think we're gonna need that tight of a bend to get where we wanna go. So we need to get the front end back on. All right, with the intercooler back in, you can see the dilemma. So it would be silly to U-turn here to then have to U-turn into here. Like, that doesn't really make sense. But we can't really go just U-turn straight in because this necks down so much. Now, the problem is my bender, I can't remake this end tank with my bender. I don't have a wide enough bender. Plus, that would take a lot of time, and trying to cut this core off, it's not ideal. So we're gonna try to go into this end tank, but that means we need to come over here. Like, we gotta U-turn out of this, then jog it over this way, and then straighten it out with enough room to put a clamp here. And this is at an angle, so it's gonna have to like, it's gonna be really tricky, but we're gonna try to just start cutting some pieces. All right, this way you got power steering pump fully mounted up. Very simple, it works out, and no modifications to the bracket. That was something we wanted to do in case, you know, this pump's a dud. We don't want to have to completely remodify the bracketry since it doesn't unbolt on the back here for another one. So really happy to have that out of the way. It's another big thing off the checklist. Power steering pump is officially mounted. So I was trying to use this piece because it comes down the right amount off the turbo for this 90 to turn and clock up some to match the angle of the intercooler, but it goes too far this way, going past the intercooler. So I'm gonna try to use this tight radius and then a 90 off this, and then I think we're gonna be able to get this done with this donut section, but I need to cut another 90 out of it. But you can see the difference in a tight radius and a short radius. Like, that's the difference in distance. That's why I use pie cuts a lot, because this is what you normally have to work with. It's just a super wide bend. So anyway, jibber jabber, let's cut another piece. All right, pretty much on. So cutting our second piece here, it was really important that we made sure that our cut line was straight, because if it's not straight, we're not gonna have a 90. I've only got one of these donuts, so I did not want to screw this up. So with this second piece cut and cleaned up, we started mocking everything up, and things were looking great. Things were looking really good for this working. So the reason we're dropping it down so far is so that we can rotate that 90 and get the angle to match and it to go straight into the side intake of the intercooler there. So I was really happy with this because not only were we able to get it lined up, but we still had room on the other end for a clamp. I was worried that it would be too close together, but after some more tinkering, we discovered a problem. All right, well, once we spotted a problem, as I was just looking at all the angles, I had yet to check height, and we are way below the intercooler. It'd probably be off the ground, maybe, but we're below the subframe. Now, we worked real hard to not let anything be below the subframe or floor pan. So we've got a couple options here. We can tuck it way up, straighten this angle out, keep it up high. For our clamp here, put a one pie cut piece to level it out. So basically come out of here, turn, and then go straight in. Now it's still difficult getting into here. I'm waiting on a clamp to get here that adapts from 3.5 down to 3 inch, because the problem is this is 3 inch, and to put anything on the face, it's gotta be 3 inch. So once we get that, we'll be able to finalize this more, but we can definitely make it work. So what I kinda wanna tinker with is the air intake itself. So we have some big 5-inch aluminum here. So I wanna cut this as short as we can and see if it's gonna work. So let's try that. That's another big question mark, is we really need to get this intake out and into the bumper area here. And we really need to keep it 5-inch, because you think the air that's coming through there, it's basically gotta take all the air in through there that is gonna be going through these 3.5-inch pipes compressed, which compressed air, there's a lot more air in a smaller space. So we need as big of an intake as we can, and this is 5-inch, so we'd like to leave that, not have to bring it down to 4-inch. So, jibber jabber, let's cut this giant. It's crazy. You go from 3-inch, right, so look at this. This is 3-inch to 3.5-inch. That's a massive difference. Then you go to 4-inch, that's a massive difference. Then you go to 5-inch, absolutely insane. And if you do the math on surface area, for example, a 4-inch pipe actually has about the same surface area as 2 3-inch pipes. So you do pi r squared, whatever. Math. We learned this in school. All right, I'm gonna quit jibber jabbering and clean up some, then cut these pieces. Been working sloppy. So things got a little tricky for us here because my cold cut saw only goes up to 4 3/4. So we couldn't finish the cut with the cold cut saw. We had to finish the cuts with the grinder. So that was kind of a pain, but we got it done and we started mocking it up. Now the idea was to go up, make some crazy jogs and bends, and then go in front of the intercooler. So we test fit the bumper on there to see if that's feasible, see if the 5-inch is gonna fit, and it looks relatively feasible, but it's not looking like the most ideal. So we start looking at other routes and find a pretty good alternative. Well, I am really pleased with that potential air intake situation. Getting it up through here was gonna be a tall order, and it became a taller order when I couldn't pie cut the leftovers of straight sections with my cold cut saw, because it only goes up to 4 3/4. So that was going to be really difficult to try to make pie cuts, which is going to be the only way we were going to finagle our way up and in and through here. So to be able to go down there, A1. So we've got a couple ideas for temporary time saving. We can just come over here and put a big filter, you know, back behind here. Now the only downfall is when we're driving in the wet, because we do drive in the wet, it's Florida, we drive in the wet a lot. This tire is going to be spraying water on the filter. So we're going to need to build some sort of splash guard. The other idea would be to build a big aluminum box and basically bring that pipe into a big box and then have a big filter element on top. So after thinking about it some, thinking about the box idea and whatnot, I decided, you know what, let's just make an intake work. We have the pieces, I got these 2 90s, and the idea was doing it the original way. I was going to use the 90s, and since these pieces that I got came with really long straight legs, I was going to cut pie cuts out of the leftover legs, and I should have plenty of material to do the crazy jogs to get in front of the intercooler. However, as you saw, pie cutting not really going to work out that well. So what we had to do, because we did end up needing at least a couple of pie cuts to get the 90 to work going the lower way, was cut most of the way through with the cold cut saw and then come back with a grinder and cut the rest of the way through. Now this is a little sketchy. Not ideal, definitely not the best way to do it. Required a lot of cleanup, but we got what we needed. We got a few pie cuts, and then we could start mocking this up to get this 90 to come out where we needed it. And man, it's looking like it's going to be pretty solid. It's going to be a good functional intake that's going to be where it needs to be. This is really exciting because getting a 5-inch intake out into fresh cold air on any build, any combination is not an easy task. So to do it on a Turbo LS and a Vet, just the plumbing and everything is working out so well. So we went ahead and bead-rolled it, test fitted it back on, and let's see if we have an intake. We have an air intake. Check it out. Steers clear of the intercooler with those 2 little pie cuts, but we really need to get an air filter in and see. Super happy to be able to fit a 5-inch intake. We'll go from there, but big old intake. We're playing the waiting on parts game. So we're waiting on the piece I need to weld into the intercooler. So we do have another major project to tackle, and that is the fuel system. So we have absolutely every last part and piece for our fuel system from Detour. So we've ran Detour fuel pumps, lines, fittings, injectors on pretty much every build ever since I started YouTube, at least a long time, and I've had incredible luck. So we got their fittings. I really like their fitting style, the color and everything. They're really nice, high quality fittings. We got their line. We've got this, which I got to get out and show you. We have 4, count them, 400 liter per hour fuel pumps. We've got 2 different types of fuel filters and 2 different fuel filters in general. We've got their 2000 regulator. This thing's really nice. This is what we were kind of tinkering with, trying to figure out where we wanted to put it earlier. So yeah, let me get this stuff out of the box and show it to you, because this piece is really cool that they came out with. This thing's a game changer. So what we have is a Detour's in-tank surge tank setup. So this is the bolt pattern of a lot of fuel cells, including our fuel cell. And this is going to bolt into the fuel cell. And inside the tank, we're going to have a surge tank. So on the Miata, for example, we have an external surge tank. So the fuel comes out of the stock tank, then fills up the surge tank. So it's just more complicated. You've got to have more lines and fittings and things. This is all going to be integrated inside this fuel cell, which I think is so cool. So the idea behind the surge tank is fuel slosh is a big issue, especially in drift cars. Fueling is your #1 priority, really. If you have good oil flow and good fuel flow, it's pretty hard to hurt an engine. But if you lack on either of those 2 things, man, things go bad in a hurry. So what the surge tank does is we're going to have a lift pump that's going to fill up the surge tank. So this is always going to be full of fuel. And our pumps that are feeding the engine are going to feed from this little tank that's constantly being refilled. It acts kind of like a battery capacitor. So we don't have to worry about if the fuel sloshes around in the tank for a second away from the pickup. This is essentially our reserve. So it basically is just going to keep filling whenever the fuel's in the right place. Whereas if your pump was relying on that fuel in the tank, if it sloshes away for even a split second, then you're going to starve the fuel for a split second. So surge tanks are crucial. When you're running lower power numbers, not a ton of fuel, it's not that necessary, but at any bit of a high power level, a surge tank's pretty much a necessity. I can't imagine running without a surge tank. So really excited about this. They came out with this kind of at the perfect time shortly after we got this car, so we were able to keep our fuel cell, and it's a nice rig. So we need to get our pumps and everything built into this, and we need to get this into the fuel cell. That's really step #1, priority #1, but it's a nice unit. So we got our lift, and then stage 1, stage 2. So we can do up to 3 pumps in here. I'm thinking we'll only need 2, but we'll put 3 in, and we'll be able to wire it to where we'll have to decide on that. Let's get this other stuff unboxed and start making some decisions on how we want to do this. So we started tinkering with this to get it set up. So we take these 2 plugs out because those are there in case you're only using, 1 lift pump, 1 feed pump. So that way you can go from one up to 3, same setup, not have to get anything, not have to change anything. So you can see the lift pump pokes through the bottom because it's going to be drawing the fuel in and pumping it into the tank. We're also going to be returning from the engine to the tank as well. So again, the tank is always getting fed. So we get our pumps in, we're running 4 400 liter per hour pumps, 1 for the lift, 3 for the feed. Absolutely insane amount of fuel. So we just need to figure out how we want to orient them, get them all in there. They're big old pumps, and get everything wired up, and we're ready to roll. All right, we got triple good news here. Good news number 1, Josue got the surge tank setup finished up. Snazzy looking unit. We got the pumps numbered. I'm really hoping we can make the power we want on the 2, because then basically the 3rd pump will be a backup, and we can have it, like I said, automatically programmed to be a backup, which would be super nifty. 2, looks like the intake's gonna work. I actually took 1 pie cut out, but I put the bumper on, test fitted the filter, and it all fits. So I was about to just start welding that up against my better judgment since I haven't finished this, but this piece came in. So this is basically the second half of this Wanjan clamp, but it goes up to 3.5 inch. So now we won't have to do any crazy modifications to the intercooler. That means we can hold off on the intake and wait to do that until this is done, which is sick. Oh, 3rd thing, 4th, I don't know how many things. A lot of good things. My double slip joint came in for the hot side of the turbo kit. And this is something I have been anxiously waiting for because I'm dreading it. We have to get this perfect, right? Cutting into something and putting something else in there is always incredibly difficult. This is going to be a big challenge to get this right. And if we can get this done and it all fits right and works and functions like it should, that'd be a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. Same with getting this cold side done. So I'm pumped. We can start working on that. Josue's probably going to start working on pulling the fuel tank and start getting the surge tank set up in. So we're just going to keep cruising along, but nice little Happy Taylor update for you. So Josue got started on taking apart the fuel cell, taking the old hat off. So this is a traditional fuel cell hat. Basically, there's a hose that runs down to a pickup screen in the bottom corner of the tank, and you have to run an inline pump that then sucks the fuel up and out to itself. So it's a much more complex setup. You've got a lot going on outside of the tank. Whereas with our Detour setup, we not only have now all of our pumps inside the tank, we have the surge tank inside the tank, our capacitor, which allows us to get rid of the fuel foam. So the fuel foam is great because it acts as a baffle. It keeps your fuel from sloshing around so that it stays by the pickup. But the problem is it degrades over time, especially when you're running what we're running, E85. So it's something that can become a big problem down the road and get stuck up and clog up pumps, filters, all sorts of stuff. It can become an absolute mess. So for us to be able to get rid of the foam, not have to run the foam, but still be able to use every drop out of this tank without any fuel cut is going to be really nice and cut down a lot on routine service that we need to do, as well as simplifying the whole system. As Josue was making headway with the fuel cell and the fuel system, I went ahead and started working on committing to cutting this thing that I already built apart to weld this double slip joint in here. Now, I've mentioned it before, it is really difficult to weld something in place of something else and something that's already built, but it's especially painful to cut apart something that you built and finished and finalized and chop it up and hope that you fit it back together as well as it fit before. Now, if it doesn't fit great at first, it is what it is, but if it's already fitting good, it's tough. So anyway, we get our first cut in this thing, we get it cleaned up. Now, the way these double slip joints work, they slide over the existing material. So we don't need to cut this whole amount out. We need to cut pretty much an exact amount out to take up the taper on the slip joint. So this is tricky, and this is another one of those things in this project. We've really got to sneak up on it. So we just start cutting, an 1/8 to 1/4 inch at a time until we can get this to fit in there like we want it. So we cut it. It was really close, but not quite right. We go ahead and we cut it again, and it's still a little close. We went to the belt grinder, and we got it to finally fit right, and we got the fit up spot on, which I was really happy about. Now, the hardest part is yet to come. We need to tack this thing in numerous places. So before I dive into that, I'm sweating it. I go ahead and help Josue toss the fuel tank back in, and then it's time to commit. So we go ahead and we throw a bunch of tacks on this thing. This has some play, and if we tack it all crooked, then it's not going to want to go together and come apart easily. It's going to be kind of bound up in there. So it's important that we tack it in the right spot, the right flex amount, more or less, but also we do a bunch of tacks. So this is the one thing I was warned about with these, is that we need to weld them in increments. If we just go sending it, going a full weld around them, they'll warp and then they won't want to fit together. They'll be ovalized. So it takes a lot longer to weld like this than it does to just weld fresh around something. So we've got to weld, an inch at a time between the tacks and then rotate and then inch, rotate. And this is one of the more difficult things about doing fab work on stuff like this is really just orienting the piece that you're welding and getting it in a good position. So when you change that way more times than you need to, it takes a good bit of time, especially while trying to back purge because, the hose keeps popping out and it's getting tugged and tangled, and it took a bit. It took longer than it should to weld these, but we wanted to make sure we got this right. I do not want to have to redo this piece, and what do you know? It comes apart and it goes back together. So we did it. This was successful, assuming that it goes back in. And for having to stop and start a million times, the welds actually came out not too bad. Really not too bad in the grand scheme of things. So I'm really happy with that. Last step is to put it back in. Now, when we did this, when we took it apart and go to put it back together, what we decided to do was loosen the exhaust housing a little bit, loosen the turbo mount a little bit, loosen the downpipe a little bit, just loosen everything some so we could kind of get everything happy and then tighten it all back down. All right. Whew. I can sleep at night now. That one was definitely keeping me up at night. Very happy we were able to get that in. We've actually got this all fitting better than it was originally, which was kind of the hope. But it was a tall order. Turbo mount's good, everything's solid. Okay, stoked on that. Now we have some give, some flex in the system. Everything should be happy, hopefully. So, we also obviously got the fuel cell in. Looks a gajillion times better with that nice aluminum hat. Oh, so much better. This obviously isn't about aesthetics, but man, that looks snazzy. So now we're working on mounting our fuel filters. And this is what takes a long time. We'll most definitely have spent more time planning where we want to put these than the act of actually putting them. That's why, we could probably finish this car out in 2 or 3 weeks of really, going at it, but not well. That would be not thinking it through, just, all right, let's slap the filter here, slap it here, make some lines, let's go, instead of trying to come up with the best possible place. So I'm gonna go jibber jabber and we're gonna get back to work. We have what we need to build this guy. So I wanna get the intercooler back on and I wanna do this. Because if we can get this done, man, I'll sleep like a baby. That's my last big thing, man. We got the intake figured out. Assuming that this works. If this works, we'll have this figured out. We got that done. Oof, the big check marks, man. So I'm gonna get back to work. Josue's gonna get back to work. We'll eventually figure out where we want to put these. So the first thing we needed to do before we could even start mocking all of this up was make a couple of pie cuts to go between the intercooler and the clamp face. Now, I went ahead and cut a bunch of pie cuts. This is for 2 reasons. 1, in case we needed them. 2, I wanted to cut a bunch of different sizes, so we would definitely have the angle or combination of angles that we would need to get it lined up correctly. That way we had options to choose from. So with that done, we went ahead and threw the intercooler back in and the bash bar setup and started looking at how this was going to pan out, how many pie cuts we were going to need, which ones we were going to need. And with that done, it was time to start taping up the bins themselves. So we needed to get these oriented how we thought they were going to look, and trying to hold all of these pieces together in place. They all have an impact on the final fit up. They all have to be just right. It was a little tricky, but we got it close where we thought we were happy with it, and I went ahead and just decided to tack it. Now, this is not my normal MO. Normally, I get everything fitting, I tack it in the car, but in this situation, it was going to be too hard to hold this stuff in place, so we just had to kind of gamble, throw some witness marks on it from just holding it up there in place, pull it out of the car, tack it all together, and that way it would be easier to hold it in place, because, at the time, we're trying to hold 5 different individual pieces against 2 flanges. It's hard to know for sure if that's going to work. So we put it all back in, and it's close, man. It's close enough to where part of me wanted to say, just send it, we'll make it work. The other part of me knows this is critical. So I decided to take it back out, cut the tacks, re-tack it, turn just a couple of degrees, and we finally got it all fitting as it needed to. All right, well, we've made it through half the battle. I know it's a little bit of a contraption, but let me show you the original piece. From that to that. That's pretty much the orientation. Planning, man, I know I've said it a million times during this build, and it makes things take longer, but planning is critical. Planning is critical. So I'm really happy we're able to make this work. Now, we've only made it through half the battle, let me say that. We've got to perfectly mark the hole for this in the intercooler, cut it without damaging anything, and then get this welded in the perfect spot that this all fits back together. So that is what is next. Excited, man. This is, I'm trying to sleep like a baby. Trying to get some good sleep tonight, so let's see if we can get this done. So the time has come. We get to put everything back in, tighten it all down, make sure we're happy with it, make sure we mark it as best we can, because that's what we're going to be relying on when we pull it out and need to cut our hole. Now, obviously, it's not ideal to have to cut and grind and drill into an intercooler setup like this, because those metal shavings are going to go everywhere. So we taped up the inside of the core as best we could. We shoved paper towels in there. We did the best we could to try to keep this thing from filling with metal shavings. Now, we're going to clean it out, but there's only so much you can do. So we used a combination of tools to cut this to avoid using the plasma cutter, drill bits, then the jigsaw, and then the carbide burr to come do the final cleanup job and take it all the way out to full size. So with that done, our piece fully fitted up that we're happy with, we know this should all pan out. It's time to finally say goodbye to this V-band, cut it off, and plate it up. So we take a little piece of scrap, we cut it as round as we can on the bandsaw, and that's what the belt grinder's for. We finish off rounding it off on the belt grinder, just a rough fit, doesn't need to be perfect. And what do you know? Fits pretty good, covers the hole, should be nice and easy to weld in. So with the intercooler prepped and ready, I wanted to go ahead and weld this part that we're welding to the intercooler out first. It's just going to be a lot easier to do these welds with it by itself, or we can just rotate it on the bench than it will be once it's welded to the intercooler core. So we get it all welded up, and then it's time to tack it to the intercooler core. Now, this is a lot of commitment. We can't undo this. So we go ahead, we get a couple of tacks on it, just 2. So in case we need to cut them, we test fit it back in yet again. Yep, the name of the game, test fitting. Test fit, test fit, test fit. And what do you know? It all fits back perfect, better than I could have hoped. Our marks were where they needed to be. We did a good job in that department. Now it's time to weld it out. So we threw a few more tacks on it so it doesn't warp or twist too much. And I will say this thing was not the most fun to weld out. It took a lot of heat, and there was a couple spots that they just weren't happy, but we got it done. We got that welded on, and then we needed to weld our plate on. Now, this was a little tricky because I'm kind of standing up here on my tippy toes trying to reach this. It's just the best way I could put it where it would stay in place and I could weld it. But we got it done. The intercooler itself is finished. Finito. So now it's time to move on to the actual pipe, the pipe portion of things. So even less welds on this guy. We've only got 3 welds. We've got 2 flanges and the center joint. Nice, short, simple, compact piece. I love it. So we get those welded, and then before I weld the V-band, to avoid it warping, I went ahead and clamped another V-band to it, and that's going to act as a big heat sink for us, just to draw some of the heat out and try to keep this from warping. We want minimal warpage. That is the name of the game with welding. You've got to make sure that you don't warp things, because if you do, they don't fit and they leak. So anyway, we got that thing done. Flows nice. It's solid. I'm very happy with it. So now is the moment of truth. We put it all back in the car. So we put our bend piece on, our actual intercooler pipe, and then we put the intercooler back in. And what do you know? Everything lined up way better than I could have hoped for doing it the way we did it. All right, check that out. That is the best I've ever fit 2 of these together. And it was a lot tighter tolerances than usual. Hold on. Well, that's it. We did it. Mission accomplished. We've got plenty of room left in this guy. Plenty of room for misalignment. We got it spot on, man. Like I said, I've never had one end up fitting that close before. And this was the hardest one to get to fit upright. So very, very pleased with that. Look at that, man. It's not the prettiest thing. It's kind of a little goofy looking. I get it. But it does the job. It saves so much space. I love it, man. I'm so happy with this packaging. Super short intercooler runs, man. Let's test fit the intake real quick, just out of curiosity. But before we finalize that, I want to do this pipe. If we can have the intercooler piping done and the intake done and that double slip joint, man, that'll be a big old step forward. So let's try the intake in just out of curiosity, and then let's move on to trying to figure this guy out. Whew, literally perfect. So this intercooler piece was short, sweet, simple, but a little interesting to try to figure out. It was one of those things where we had to just kind of cut a little bit at a time and then see where it fits. You couldn't really tell how much you needed to cut or mock it up in place until you cut some of it, but you don't want to cut too much. So one of those things, more cut a little, test fit, cut a little, test fit. And after a couple of cuts, we got it lined up pretty decent, but I realized we were going to need to cut all the way down at the bottom of this 45 to get it low enough to clear the hood. And we're going to have to extend it. Now, I wanted to avoid this, but even without having to do that, even without the hood clearance being an issue, we were going to have to extend it. So I went ahead and welded. Luckily, the scrap straight section I cut off originally, which happened to be the perfect length, and then we moved all the welding stuff over, hooked it up, and put this thing in place and tacked it in the car. Now, as simple as this is, it does not have a lot of slop on either end. It really needs to fit pretty perfect, and luckily, it was pretty easy to tack in the car because it was really accessible from the top. So once we got it tacked, we checked it a couple times. We were confident it was right and it was going to fit. We weren't going to weld out a dud piece that wasn't going to fit any longer, and we were going to have to do it again. I can't tell you how bad that feels. It's not fun. You want to make sure that what you're about to put all this time into welding is still going to fit and do its job. So we get this thing welded up. We clamp another V-band on the other end. Same process. Easy peasy. Now let's toss it back in and see if it still fits. But overall, it came out pretty decent. Let's quit jibber jabber and put this thing back in. All fits, let's tighten it down. Whew, that's it. Oh, it looks way better. I wish I could have got some 45s with a really long leg so we wouldn't have to make this weld, but it is what it is. So obviously we still got to add our blow-off valve and an intake air temp sensor. I need to order flanges for both of those. I wanted to see if I had the right stuff to build this myself as far as the clamps go. Oh man, what a treat. What a treat. What a freaking feeling, man, to finally have the last fab work done. Now there's a couple things to do. There's still a couple things left to do, and that are technically fab work, welding and cutting and stuff, but I mean, the turbo kit is done. The turbo's mounted. We have our double slip joint to give everything some flex. The exhaust is 75% done. The intercooler piping is done, and the intake is kind of done. But we're actually gonna pick up there. So thinking about this some more, looking at it, I wanna try to basically cut this 90 off, maybe add another V-band just to get us turned a little bit more and try to put the filter right there. Now it's gonna draw in a little bit warmer air, but it'll be a little more protected than it is out here. I don't think it would get hit out here. It's like someone would have to really get into my bash bar to make that work, but my biggest thing here is the water from the tire. So if we have it up here, it's not gonna, at least not gonna be mostly getting directly splashed by water. So let's try it. I'm glad we didn't weld it out, so we have the option. I was just so hyped that we were able to get 5-inch out of there that I was just like, yep, that's good, send it. So let's try that. Let's give that a shot. All right, I think I like that better. All right, well, I got that all tacked up. I like that. I'm good with that. Even got a bead roll on there, so the filter should stay on there solid. So if we decide to do it this way, we'll just have to throw some weld on it, maybe make a little bracket, probably something just to support it, because it's a pretty big long Johnny with a big old filter on it. But yeah, dude, I cannot tell you guys how freaking stoked I am to have this stuff done. This has been weighing on me, and we did it. Like, we got a lot done. Being able to get this done, this cold side, it came out as good as I could have hoped. We did 3.5-inch, so we even upgraded the diameter. Boom, in. Getting this guy out, that was, that wasn't really stressing me out. I knew that would be easy, but getting the double slip joint in, making a 5-inch intake work and getting the filter out of all this heat, you know. But it wasn't long ago we thought we were going to mount the turbo, we weren't even going to be able to put a filter on it, let alone run a 5-inch cold air intake, you know. So I'm pumped, man. I'm pumped. What a freaking productive few days. I should sleep like an absolute baby tonight. I got all those things that have been weighing on me, wondering how they were going to pan out. We got them off the checklist, man. We are getting so close to the point. What we're really aiming for is getting to the point where it is just lines, you know, generic plumbing and wiring, because, you know, me and Josue hopefully can divide and conquer on that, you know, get a direction, get him going, he can just go send it on the lines. I can start working on getting all the electronics mounted, getting everything wired up, and man, we could have this thing done in no time. Now, there's still a few things left to do. We're not fully done with the fab projects, just the ones that have been stressing me out. We still gotta make some rear body mounts. We need to do some mounting for the dash. We need to get that reservoir mounted. We need blah, blah, blah. But other than that, some dump tubes, we're getting there, man. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and end it here before I jibber jabber your freaking ears off. But man, I'm pumped, dude. I'm pumped. That felt good. That felt really good to get that done, and it all lined up great. And whew. So that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and end it here. I'm sure you can tell what we were getting at. I hope to see you guys next time. More work to do. Hopefully we can get this thing finished up in time. We'll see. We just got to keep pushing like it's 1995 or something. Okay. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. I will hopefully see you next time. Right? Okay. Goodbye.